Renata Joelle Ashworth had developed, over the course of her 41 years, a finely calibrated system for assessing the worth of the people around her, a system so practiced and so automatic that she no longer experienced it as judgment so much as simple perception, the way a person who has spent years in a particular trade begins to see the world through the lens of that trade without consciously choosing to do so. She assessed people the way an appraiser assesses property, quickly, with confidence, based on a set of visible indicators that she had decided, somewhere along the way, were reliable proxies for the things that actually mattered. The car a person drove. The neighborhood they lived in. The label on their coat. The quality of their shoes, which she considered the single most honest item in a person's wardrobe, because shoes, she had long believed, were the thing people were most likely to cut corners on when they were pretending to a life they had not yet fully achieved. She had grown up in a modest house in Plano, Texas, the daughter of a bookkeeper and a school administrator, and had spent the years since her marriage to Clifford Ashworth, who ran a regional division of a commercial real estate firm headquartered in Dallas, in a steady and deliberate reconstruction of herself into someone whose own shoes would never invite the kind of assessment she applied to others. She wore this reconstruction with the particular vigilance of someone who knows exactly what they are covering over, which is to say she wore it tightly, and she was not gentle with people who seemed, by their choices or their circumstances, to be failing at the same project she had worked so hard to succeed at. On a Saturday morning in April, Renata drove her white Range Rover from her house in the Prestonwood neighborhood down to the Galleria Dallas on Westheimer Road, which was where she did most of her serious shopping, by which she meant shopping that was not for household necessities or groceries but for the category of items that she thought of as investments, pieces that carried names, that came in distinctive bags, that could be worn or carried in a way that communicated something specific to the people around her about the life she inhabited and the position she occupied within it. She was going specifically to Alara, a boutique on the Galleria's upper level that carried a curated selection of European designer shoes, handbags, and accessories, and that had the kind of interior, pale gray walls, soft lighting, everything displayed with the spacious reverence of a small museum, that made spending a significant amount of money feel not like a transaction but like a considered aesthetic decision. She had been thinking about a particular pair of Italian leather pumps she had seen in the store's online lookbook for 2 weeks, and she had decided this morning, over her second coffee, that she was going to buy them today, and possibly the sandals she had also been considering, because Clifford had closed a large deal in Fort Worth earlier in the week and the timing felt right for a small personal celebration of his success, which was also her success, which was the way she had always understood their arrangement. She walked into Alara at 10:40 and the sales associate, a young woman named Priya, composed and professional in the way that luxury retail trains its people to be composed and professional, greeted her with a warm smile and asked how she could help. Renata told her she wanted to see the pumps from the spring collection, the Italian ones in the cognac leather that had been featured in the lookbook, and also the strappy sandal in ivory if they had it in a 7. Priya brought both, along with 2 additional options she thought Renata might consider based on what she had described, and Renata sat in the white velvet chair near the display mirror and tried everything on with the unhurried authority of a woman who has allocated the morning to exactly this purpose and does not feel the need to compress it. She decided on the pumps in cognac and in black, 2 pairs, because the cognac was obvious and the black was necessary, and she was at the counter completing the transaction, which came to just over $4,000 on her card, when she became aware of someone at the counter beside her and looked over and experienced the particular sensation of recognizing a face from a context so different and so long ago that for a moment the recognition and the placement refused to arrive simultaneously, so that you know the face before you know why you know it. The woman at the adjacent counter was named Celine Marie Okafor, and she was 40 years old, and she and Renata had attended the same high school in Plano 23 years ago, and they had been friends in the loose and situational way that high school produces friends, not close, not intimate, but genuinely warm in the context of shared classes and shared lunch periods and the particular social fabric of a specific time and place that dissolves almost completely upon graduation and leaves behind only the faint residue of recognition. Celine was wearing a neat but unremarkable outfit, dark jeans, a cream blouse, clean white sneakers, and she was speaking with a sales associate about a pair of athletic sneakers displayed on the counter, asking in a straightforward and pleasant way whether the store offered any kind of loyalty discount or whether there was a current promotion applicable to the item. Because she wanted the sneakers, but the full price was a bit more than she had been expecting and she wanted to ask before simply deciding. She was asking this the way a sensible person asks about pricing, directly, without embarrassment, because she was a sensible person and the question was a reasonable one, and she had no awareness that the woman 2 feet to her left was watching her with an expression moving through several stages of recognition, recalibration, and finally a particular kind of satisfaction that comes from encountering, in a luxury boutique on a Saturday morning, precisely the kind of contrast that confirms your existing understanding of how the world is ordered. Renata picked up her bag from the counter and walked over to Celine and said her name with the bright, slightly theatrical warmth of someone performing a reunion they are enjoying more than they are feeling, and Celine turned and her face opened into genuine surprise and genuine pleasure, because she had liked Renata well enough in high school and had no particular reason to have revised that assessment in the years since. They exchanged the rapid, compressed catching up of people who have not seen each other in 2 decades. Where are you living? How is your family? Do you remember so-and-so? And Renata asked about Celine's husband, and Celine said his name was Elliot, that he was outside, that he had dropped her off and was waiting near the entrance because he didn't like shopping, which she said with the easy affection of someone describing a known and loved quality of a long-term partner. And then Renata made the remark. She made it with the particular smoothness of someone who has been packaging cruelty as observation for so long that they can no longer locate the boundary between the two, and she said, with a glance at the sneakers on the counter and the question Celine had been asking about discounts, that she hoped things were going well, that it was funny how different their lives had turned out, and she raised her left hand in a gesture that was not accidental and showed the diamond ring that Clifford had given her for their 10th anniversary, the one that had cost, as she now mentioned, somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000, and said that Clifford worked so hard that she really had nothing to worry about in terms of, well, this kind of thing, gesturing in a way that managed to include both the sneaker counter and Celine's general circumstances in a single unhurried sweep. Celine looked at Renata for a moment with an expression that was entirely calm and entirely clear, and she said that she was glad things were going well for them, and that Elliot worked hard too, and that her husband was outside if Renata wanted to meet him, and then she completed her purchase, paying the full price, no discount applied, without any visible distress about the absence of one, and she said it was genuinely lovely to run into her, that she hoped they'd do it again, and she walked out of Alara toward the mall corridor. Renata watched her go and felt the specific, pleasant solidity of a social exchange that had confirmed something she already believed, and she gathered her 2 large bags and followed, not because she intended to continue the conversation but because the exit was in the same direction and she was curious, in a distant way, to see the kind of car Celine's husband drove. The outdoor section of the Galleria near the north parking structure had a small landscaped area along the walkway where a row of ornamental trees were planted in large stone containers, and it was near one of these containers that Renata saw, as she emerged from the mall entrance, a man in simple clothing, dark slacks, a plain button-down, no jacket, crouching beside an older gentleman in a facilities uniform, helping the man gather something from the ground around the base of the tree container. The older man appeared to be a member of the Galleria's maintenance staff, and he was moving slowly, with the careful pace of someone whose joints required negotiation, and the man in the plain button-down was collecting what appeared to be a set of keys and several small items that had scattered across the paving stones, picking them up one by one with a focused patience that suggested he was going to stay until every last item was recovered regardless of how long it took. Renata registered this scene in her peripheral awareness in the way she registered most things that did not immediately pertain to her, which is to say she registered it and moved past it, and she was scanning the parking structure entrance for Celine when she heard Celine's voice saying his name, Elliot, and she saw Celine walk toward the man in the plain button-down and put her hand on his arm. And the man stood and smiled at the older maintenance worker and said something to him and shook his hand, and the maintenance worker nodded with genuine warmth, and Elliot turned toward Celine. Renata looked at him. At the plain slacks. At the button-down with no logo. At the complete absence of any visible marker of consequence. And she felt the confirmation arrive, uncomplicated and thorough, of everything she had been thinking since she saw Celine at the sneaker counter asking about discounts. She was in the middle of formulating the thought, the one she would share with her friend Brooke over lunch, the one that began with "You'll never guess who I ran into," when a black car pulled into the drop-off lane at the mall entrance and Clifford Ashworth stepped out of it, and he was on his phone, and he was still talking into it, and then he looked up and he stopped walking. He stopped walking completely, in the middle of the pedestrian lane, with his phone still at his ear, staring at the man in the plain button-down standing with Celine near the ornamental trees. Then he lowered his phone and he walked toward the man with the specific directness of someone who has identified the most important person in their immediate vicinity and is reorienting accordingly, and he said, with a deference that Renata had never once heard in her husband's voice when he was speaking to anyone except the three people in the Dallas office above him in the organizational structure, the words "Mr. Okafor," and he extended his hand. Renata did not move. She watched her husband shake the hand of the man in the plain button-down with a formality and a respect that rewrote, in approximately 4 seconds, every assumption she had built around this encounter, and she heard Clifford say that he hadn't expected to see him here, and she heard the man, Elliot Okafor, say that his wife had wanted to stop at the Galleria and he had been waiting outside and had ended up helping a gentleman who had dropped his keys near the planter, and Clifford nodded. And said something about the Henderson project, and Elliot responded in the unhurried, authoritative tone of someone who is accustomed to being the person in the room whose opinion determines what happens next. Renata stood on the paving stones of the Galleria Dallas with 2 designer shoe bags in her hands and the specific internal sensation of a structure collapsing slowly from the foundation upward, and she understood, before anyone explained it to her and without needing them to, that Elliot Okafor was the person above Clifford in the organizational structure, which in the commercial real estate firm her husband worked for meant that Elliot Okafor was the regional director whose approval had made possible every deal Clifford had ever brought home to celebrate. Clifford turned to Renata with an expression she recognized as the one he wore when he was managing a situation that had gone wrong in a way he did not yet fully understand, and he introduced her to Elliot, and Elliot introduced Celine, and there was a brief exchange that Renata participated in with the automated politeness of someone whose internal processing is fully occupied elsewhere. Celine, beside Elliot, said nothing that referred to anything that had happened inside the boutique. She was gracious and warm in the way she had been gracious and warm at the counter, asking about the sneakers, and there was in her composure no performance of restraint, no visible effort to resist saying what she could have said, only the genuine ease of a woman who had nothing to prove and therefore no need to prove it. It was this, more than any revelation about Elliot's position or the implications of Clifford's deference, that stayed with Renata afterward, the quality of Celine's stillness, the complete absence of any desire to make the moment do what it could so easily have done. As they said goodbye and the Okafors walked toward the parking structure, Elliot pausing once to look back at the older maintenance worker and raise a hand in farewell, the man raising his in return, Renata stood on the paving stones with Clifford beside her and looked at her shoe bags and thought about the ring on her hand and thought about the question Celine had asked about the sneakers, so openly and without embarrassment, and she thought about the word discount and everything she had made it mean, and she understood that she had been using the wrong vocabulary for a very long time to describe things she had not, in fact, been seeing clearly at all. The things we use to measure people, the cars, the labels, the visible evidence of spending, are not measurements of anything real. They are noise. The signal is always something quieter, how a person treats a maintenance worker picking up dropped keys, whether they ask a reasonable question without embarrassment, whether they have enough internal security that they do not need to announce their worth to rooms full of people who did not ask. True confidence is not loud. It does not need to be. The people who are most certain of their own value are almost always the ones who spend the least effort making sure you know what it is. If this story reached you today, share it with someone in your life who needs to be reminded that humility is not the absence of success, it is the fullest and most honest expression of it.